What is up, everyone? We have a new set coming out, Duskmourn. Very creepy new set about a demon inhabiting a house which takes over a plane. Creepy stuff. Lots of horror themes going on in the set. And so, with the new set, we got to have our top 10 list, top 10 best cards in the new set. So we're going to look at those today, and we're also going to include a few honorable mentions. So without further ado, let's get into the top 10 and the honorable mentions. So we'll start with the honorable mentions first. These are cards that were good, maybe good in older formats, but didn't make the top 10 list. Honestly, I could have had a top 15 list in this set. There are quite a few pretty strong new cards, but yeah. First one is Ghost Vacuum. This is just a solid colorless, removal for graveyard cards. We've never had something exactly like this, and the reason I really like it is it's kind of like we had another card in like Legacy and things like that called I think it's called Scraping Claws, something like that, uh, or Scrapping Claws. But basically, it's very similar. 1 mana artifact, you tap it, and the opponent gets to choose to exile 1 card from their graveyard. However, this one is just a straight upgrade. You get to target a card in a graveyard and exile it, and then you get to keep doing that every turn. We've seen ones in the past where you sacrifice it and you exile the entire graveyard, which is good and bad. It's good to get rid of it, but they can fill it again, and then you don't have anything. So being able to target the cards that you want to get rid of is pretty powerful. And on top of that, it has a 6 mana ability where you can sacrifice it and you get a bunch of 1/1 spirit tokens that for every creature you've exiled with it, and they get those abilities that the ETBs that the creatures you exiled had. So it is, it's kind of like a very good graveyard hate that turns into a win con later on in the game. Ideally you'd want to exile a bunch of like Atraxa and like big creatures like that, and then later you can get those ETBs for yourself. So very solid, definitely going to be good in older formats where the graveyard 8 really matters. All right, so that's number 1. So let's look at the next one. In the honorable mentions, Peer Past the Veil, 2 red and a green. Discard your hand and draw X cards, where X is the number of card types in your graveyard. And this is pretty much always going to be like a draw, something, draw 2, draw 3 for 4 mana. And then late game, it's probably going to be like a draw 5, especially if you have your deck set up where you have got some artifacts, some enchantments, some creatures, some lands, maybe a little bit of mill. In older formats, if you have fetch lands, you're going to definitely have lands in your graveyard. And so if you have some sort of aggressive or mid-range deck, you're running low on cards, this is your top end. You're going to be pretty happy to discard like your empty hand or discard 1 card or something like that, and then draw 3 or 4 or 5 other cards. You may even want this in like a deck that wants stuff in the graveyard. So, you have a few cards left in your hand, but you want them in the graveyard. You discard them, and then you draw a bunch more. So it's very solid in green and red, where drawing is not that easy to do. I mean, it's possible, but it's a little bit tricky. This just seems like a really solid card. All right, next honorable mention, Unstoppable Slasher, 2 and a black for a 2/3 Death Touch. When it deals combat damage to a player, they lose half their life rounded up. That's pretty strong for a Death Toucher. Like, you don't want to block it, but if you don't block it, then they lose half their life. So obviously you have to block this. You have to trade if you have anything to do, anything on the board. But then when you do block it, your creature dies, and this one comes back. Comes back with tapped with 2 stun counters on it. And then the next time it dies, it won't come back unless you somehow remove the counters. So yeah, this is pretty annoying. I mean, it just keeps coming back. I mean, it doesn't just keep coming back, but it's going to come back a second time, so you're going to get a 2-for-1 value on it. It's pretty scary when it swings in. So yeah, that's why this one's in honorable mention. Definitely a solid card. The last honorable mention, Vale Lair. I don't think we've ever had an enchantment land before, or at least not a decently playable one. This is enchantment land comes in tapped. You choose a color, and then it taps for that mana of that chosen color, and it's also hexproof. So you could potentially, turn this into a creature or something, and then it's going to have hexproof. But just the fact that it's an enchantment land, there's a lot of enchantment synergies in standard and in older formats, and so we're going to be pretty happy to have this. We've had artifact lands. They were big hits. I don't see why this won't be. Okay, that's it for the honorable mentions. Let's go to the main event. The top 10 list, starting off with Aberant Oculus. So 2 and a blue for a 5/5, but the drawback is you have to exile 6 cards from your graveyard when you cast this. So how can you play this? You're going to have to play it with some mill, most likely. But let me finish reading the card. So 2 and a blue, 5/5. You have to exile 6 cards to cast it. But it's got flying, and at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, manifest dread. And manifesting dread is where you look at the top 2 cards of your library, you choose one, it becomes a 2/2 on the battlefield that you can turn up later if it's a creature. If you didn't choose it, then the other card goes into the graveyard. So it fills your graveyard. It gives you creatures at each opponent's upkeep. So unless the opponent, is actually it's the beginning of the opponent's upkeep, so they can't even respond. So if they don't have removal for this on your turn and they left up mana, then you're gonna always get the 2/2 on their turn. So that's pretty good. I mean, it's a big body. The cost is not that unreasonable. Like 6 cards from your graveyard is not that hard to do. Mid to late game, you're definitely gonna have it, and then it just generates you value every single turn. And even the manifest dread creatures potentially could have more value because you can turn them up later. If you manifest another Oculus, then you can turn it up for 3 mana and be pretty happy about that. So it seems good. It seems really good to me. It's basically always a 2-for-1. The potential goes up from there, and it's not that hard to get 6 cards in your graveyard. Turn 1 mill, turn 2 mill, and then you got it. So yeah, worst case, you play it a little off curve. You play it at turn 4 or something, but it seems very doable. All right. So next one up is the Disturbing Mirth. Red and black for an enchantment. When it enters, you sacrifice another enchantment or creature. If you do, then you draw 2 cards. And when you sacrifice this enchantment, then you manifest dread, which is what we just talked about, making the creature from your one of your top 2 cards. So I think this is really good because we've seen similar effects in the past where it's like discard a card and draw 2 cards, or sacrifice an artifact and draw 2 cards, sacrifice a creature, draw 2 cards. So the effect itself is very good. There's a lot of 1 mana enchantments in standard right now, like that make the opponent discard a card and then they just sit around. So you can do that. You can sack it. You can draw 2 cards, and then later you can sack this enchantment, and you can manifest dread. So you get even more value off it. So essentially, it's pretty much always a 2 for 0 kind of. And then you might get the 3rd card off of it later on when you sack it. So very, very cool. And if you have enchantment synergy, having this on the battlefield could also be beneficial for that. All right, next one, Enduring Curiosity. This is 2 blue for a flash 4/3 enchantment creature. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. And when this creature dies, if it was a creature, then return it to the battlefield as an enchantment. So we've seen similar effects to this plenty of times in the past. Usually it's 2 blue, and it says when a creature deals combat damage, you draw a card. So, this is a creature stapled onto an already known effect for 2 and blue in the past. Amonkhet had it. The original Amonkhet had that card. There's been a few other ones in different sets, but essentially, this is like a pretty known card. Recently, that's been a little bit too weak. So 2 and blue for potential to draw cards when you deal damage. People just remove your creatures and then you don't get in the damage. So that's been a little bit too weak, and people haven't been, playing that as much. But It's still potentially pretty strong, and the fact that this is staple to a body with flash and a 4/3, and the creature's an enchantment, which can matter in a lot of cases. Um, I think the potential is very high. I mean, even if this one deals damage, you get a card. So it's kind of just like it's always a 2-for-1, right? They have to kill this so you don't get cards, and then you get the enchantment side, and they're probably going to want to kill the enchantment as well, so you don't get cards off of that. And as long as you have a few flyers or menace creatures in your deck, then you're likely going to get some cards. I mean, Gix Yawgmoth Praetor was I think that's what it's called. Hopefully I'm not getting that wrong, but the Gix 3-mana Gix was seen quite a lot of play where people will play an aggressive deck, they throw down the Gix and they draw a few cards off of it, and it just kind of snowballs the game from there. So this doesn't really seem that different to me. It has flash as well, which is really nice, and it's persistent in the fact that they can't just kill it easily. So I think this is a very solid card, and we'll probably see it in like Dimir mid-range. Next one up, Entity Tracker. This is our first kind of like blue enchantress type effect. At least as far as I know, it's a 2 and a blue for a flash 2/3. Again, flash. It works really great with that last flash card as well. You can flash either of them in. And then whenever an enchantment you control enters, or when you unlock a room, draw a card. So ideally, you wait till the opponent's tapped out on their turn, you cast this in, and then your turn you untap. You've got 4 mana now. You can cast an enchantment. You could cast that last, Enduring Curiosity. It's an enchantment. It gets you a card. And then you swing in with your Entity Tracker with the cat on the board, and you get another card. Or potentially you play this at the end of their end step on 3. On your turn, you untap, you cast a bunch of auras or something like that, or cheap enchantments, and you get a bunch of cards. So it doesn't trigger just once. That's the other really big thing, is it triggers infinitely. Like as many enchantments as you cast, you get the cards. So it looks really, really good to me. We've seen this in the past, and even in like older formats, having an enchantress type effect at 3 mana is still very playable. So I don't see why it wouldn't be. It is stuck on a creature, so I mean, they can kill it. That's the only downside. But maybe you have some flash enchantments or some protection. There's one in the format that's a flash enchantment that gives hexproof. So I mean, you can flash this in, hold up the 1 for that, and then protect it if you need to. Yeah, it just seems really, really good. All right, Overlord of the Bailmark. This is they have like a whole cycle of these overlords. I didn't like that many of them, but there were a few that I liked. This one I really, really like. I just think all parts of it work out very, very well. So for 5 mana, you can cast it for a 5/5 that when it enters, you mill 4 cards and you return a non-avatar creature or a planeswalker from your graveyard to your hand. Note, it doesn't say you have to return a creature from the milled cards, which a lot of the recent cards have said. It just says from your graveyard. So if you're casting this on turn 5, you're most likely going to have some creatures in your graveyard already, and this is going to give you something back. However, you don't have to wait to turn 5 to cast this, because it has an ability called Impending. Impending 5 for 1 and a black. You can cast this, and it enters the battlefield as an enchantment. It triggers the enter ability where you mill 4 and you return a non-avatar creature or a planeswalker. And so it's kind of like filtering card draw type effect. Like you play this, you fill your graveyard a bit. You have a little bit of selection of the 4 cards, or maybe your 1-drop that died, to return to your hand. And then it sits on the battlefield after another basically 4 turns after that, because the first counter will go away at the end of your first turn when you play it. So you have to wait a total 5 turns, but the first turn is kind of only half a turn because you're casting on the first turn. So yeah, eventually it's going to come in as a creature on like turn 6 or so, and then every time it attacks you get more cards. So early game, it's like it's a way to find your pieces, and then late game, it's gonna swing in for damage and draw you more cards. So both sides of it seem really, really good. You know, if it's like turn 5 already or turn 4 or late game, you probably just cast it as the 5/5. But early on, you cast it for 2 mana and you know, kind of cheat out a really big creature. So this one, it seems very solid to me. There's even some shenanigans you can do by removing counters from it and make it come out early, which is something I'm definitely gonna try in standard. It seems pretty cool. So we're gonna check that out in you know, probably the first day or so. And then you know, having in your graveyard filled can have a lot of synergies in standard right now. So that's also really good. It's enchantment, a lot of synergies with that. I mean, you could play it with the entity tracker and, you know, draw an extra card off of that. So this thing just does everything. It's really, really amazing, and it's one of the it is the best Overlord in my opinion. Yeah, the other ones don't even compare. Like, they're good, but this one is really good. All right, next up, Pyroclasm. So Pyroclasm, this is a staple from a long time ago. 1 in a red, deal 2 damage to each creature. It's basically the cheapest sweeper ever printed, basically, and I don't even know if it's in Pioneer or anything, but yeah, it's pretty good. It'll definitely be nice in older formats where people are dropping 1-drops that are like 1/2/1s, or, you know, 1/2s or things like that. So it'll be nice to be able to sweep them there. But even in standard, we got a lot of aggressive red decks. We got aggressive bunny decks, and having a sweeper on turn 2 is definitely nice. Even if you only kill 1 creature with this, it's not the end of the world. Like, it's essentially the same cost as a removal spell, so you're not too unhappy. So Pyroclasm seems like a good card, and it will probably be in standard in any red deck. All right, Rite of the Moth. 1 white and a black for a reanimation effect, but it does return the creature to from the graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter. So you can't keep doing it over and over again, unfortunately. But yeah, I think 4 mana is the cheapest reanimation effect that we have in any format. Yeah, I always draw blanks when it comes time to recording, but there is something in Historic that is it has like, it's like 5 mana, 4 and a black to reanimate something, but if it's in your graveyard, the flashback cost is 3 and a white. So you can, a lot of people will just mill their deck and then, you know, cast the reanimation for 4 mana basically. So this is similar to that. It's kind of inverted. So you want this Rite of the Moth in your hand. You cast it with some of the cards you've discarded or milled earlier on in the game, and then you reanimate like an Atraxa. You get a bunch of cards, and even though your Atraxa has a finality counter on it, it's not the end of the world because you got a lot of value out of it. And then later, this has flashback, so 3 white, and a black, you can cast this again and reanimate something else. So it just seems like the most powerful reanimation spell that we have in standard, and doing it for 4 mana is 1 turn earlier, means you're probably going to beat the aggro decks because you get your tracks on turn 4. And yeah, really solid. Turn 4 and turn 5 is a huge difference. So this is definitely going to see play, and this is definitely the best reanimation spell we have. All right. Sorry, this is sideways. These cards are always printed sideways on the websites, but Roaring Furnace and Steaming Sauna. This is a room card, one of the new enchantment room cards. I think this is the best one in my opinion. So on the left side, we have 1 in a red, and when you cast that, it goes onto the battlefield as an enchantment, and it deals damage equal to the number of cards in your hand to the opponent's creature, one of the opponent's creatures. So it's a removal spell for 1 in a red. You know, if you cast this on turn 2, it's probably dealing about 5 damage to a creature. You know, a little bit later in the game, it's probably like 3 damage. I think most of the time it's probably going to be around 3 damage, so not too bad. And then late game, after you've used the removal, early game, then late game, you can unlock the second half while it's sitting on the battlefield, and it's 3 and a blue. Says you have no maximum hand size, and you draw an extra card at the beginning of your end step. So even the first turn you unlock it, you get the card. So that's pretty good. Actually, I don't know if we've seen the beginning of end step draw before. That's kind of a new one. So we do have some of those in standard for 5 mana. They didn't see any play because 5 mana to draw an extra card at your upkeep is what the other ones usually say. Hasn't really been good enough. Like it's a little bit too slow to start getting extra cards on turn 5. But since this is stable to a pretty solid removal in the early game, then I think it's worth it. Like, yeah, you're pretty happy to remove something and then later just get free cards. I mean, not free, but you know, when you don't have a turn where you're doing something, maybe you swept the board on turn 4, then turn 5 you can activate it and start drawing, something like that. So seems solid, especially in a control deck. I could see this being very good. It's, you know, it's a lot of value. So you just have to survive. If you can survive, then you're gonna get a lot of value out of it. And super late game, you know, you can just cast the 5 mana side and then later unlock the 2 mana side once you have a few cards in your hand. So it's not like if you're both out of gas, you and your opponent, and you know you don't have enough cards to use the removal side, you don't have to cast that side first. You can cast the other side first. All right, so we're almost to the end. These have been like really powerful cards in my opinion, and the power level of Duskmourn is pretty high. But it doesn't stop there. We still got 2 more Sheltered by Ghosts, 1 in a white enchantment aura. Whenever you enchant a creature you control, then you exile a target non-land permanent, not a creature, a non-land permanent, an opponent controls until this leaves the battlefield. Enchanted creature has +1, +0, lifelink, and ward 2. So, not only is it pretty hard to remove because now you've got your creature's got ward 2, it exiles any non-land permanent for 2 mana. So that's really, really solid removal there. You know, the downside, there is a downside. If the opponent like sweeps the board, right, they're gonna get their stuff back, and you're gonna lose your creature, and you're gonna lose this enchantment. So that is the big downside, is you can get kind of 2 for 1 later on if there's some sort of sweeper or removal. I think you'd want to play this in some sort of auras based deck, or at least some deck where you have some protection for your creature. Or if your deck is just aggressive enough where they're not going to have a chance to get through that ward, then you know, then it's not going to matter. But in older formats, like the Black White Auras deck would love this card so much. You know, sometimes we have to play other enchantments that exile that are just like O-rings that are not auras, so having this be an aura is a big upside for that deck. So yeah, I think this is going to be a multi-format all-star and very solid in a lot of decks. Last one, maybe I should have put these in a different order. These were not in any particular order, but the last one is Undead Sprinter. This is red and a black for a 2/2 with trample and haste. So that's not that special, but you may cast Undead Sprinter from your graveyard if a non-zombie creature died this turn. If you do, return it to the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. So essentially, you know, in your aggressive Rakdos deck, you play this as a turn 2 2/2 trample haster, which is fine. It's not great, but it's fine. I mean, hasty damage is pretty good, and then you could have some buff spells or things like that to help the trample be relevant. And then later on, you know, the opponent just kills some random creature on your battlefield, and now you can cast this. So yeah, you're gonna be pretty happy with that. It doesn't say do it at sorcery speed. But I guess you have to do it on your turn. So probably, I think you have to do it on your turn. I assume so. I mean, it's not like the other effects we've seen where it's an activated ability and you can do it anytime. So I suppose this is more likely going to be in some sort of Rakdos sacrifice deck where, you know, you have this out, it gets killed, and then maybe you cast a spell that says sacrifice a creature or an enchantment, like the one we saw earlier, and you sacrifice like a 1-drop creature and you get this back as a 3/3. So yeah, it's very solid. It's kind of, we've seen some effects like this before and they've been very solid, and Rakdos is definitely the right colors to do this in. The fact that it comes back bigger as a 3/3 with haste and trample is also very solid. So it's a lot of value, especially in a Rakdos sacrifice deck, but um it's still a pretty good card in other sets as well. All right. Well, that's going to do it for our top 10. Let me know what you think. I definitely think Duskmourn has a lot of very potentially good cards. And the power level has gone up a bit. Some people are upset about the color pie breaking. They did a couple times. Yeah, I know the other people don't care, but yeah, we'll see how it affects things. If it's going to destroy older formats or anything like that, but I don't know. But anyway, that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll have the top 5 brews coming up pretty soon. So stay tuned for that. Until next time, have a blessed day. See ya.